My name is Adrian, and the day my family banished me, they held a banquet to celebrate. They called it a farewell dinner, but the musicians played victory songs, my cousins laughed into their wine, and my father handed me the deed to the most cursed village in the kingdom like he was tossing a bone to a stray dog. According to them, my blessing was worthless. Other nobles could summon firestorms, command steel, or tame giant beasts. I could repair things. That was it. A cracked cup became a normal cup, a loose stair stopped squeaking, a ripped curtain looked slightly less embarrassing. For 15 years, everyone watched me fix furniture and decided I was born to be useless, so they exiled me to Gloamridge, a village where sunlight had not touched the ground in 80 years. The wells whispered people's secrets, the houses locked their own doors, the hot springs melted silver. Ghosts screamed every midnight, every noon, and sometimes at breakfast just to be rude. Even the road leading there had a habit of turning around and bringing travelers back to the same dead tree. My relatives expected me to return within a week, soaked, terrified, and begging to sleep in the stable. I smiled, took the deed, and asked them to save me some dessert. That was the first moment they should have realized I was not upset. I was excited. The carriage driver abandoned me 3 miles from the village. He threw my suitcase into the mud, pointed at the black clouds ahead, and fled so fast one of his wheels fell off. I repaired the wheel with a touch, watched it chase the carriage down the hill, and continued on foot. Rain hammered the road, purple lightning crawled across the sky. In the distance, Gloamridge looked less like a village and more like a pile of burned teeth. Roofs leaned against each other, chimneys coughed green smoke. A mansion stood above everything on a cliff, its windows glowing like angry eyes. The second I crossed the broken village gate, a pale blue screen opened in front of me. Renovation territory detected. I stopped in the rain. Until that moment, my blessing had only worked on objects small enough to carry, but the screen did not label the gate as an object, it labeled the entire village as a property. Then new words appeared. Owner authority confirmed, full renovation functions unlocked. I stared at the gate, placed one hand on the rotten wood, and finally understood why my power had seemed weak. I had spent my whole life repairing chairs when I was built to rebuild worlds. The gate exploded into silver light. Rotten beams twisted upward, shed their mold, and became polished blackwood. Rusty nails melted into glowing lines. The 2 leaning watchtowers straightened, grew 3 extra floors, and connected through an arch shaped like a laughing dragon. Broken lanterns became floating blue flames. The mud under my boots hardened into a wide road of dark stone that cleaned itself every time rain touched it. A final message appeared. Village entrance renovated, new function, dramatic arrival. The gate boomed open by itself. Thunder rolled at the exact same moment. Blue fire raced along the road toward the distant mansion. I laughed so hard I nearly fell over. My family had not banished me. They had handed me unlimited building materials. Of course, Gloamridge did not welcome me peacefully. The moment I reached the main square, the fog formed hundreds of faces. Every abandoned window opened. A choir of ghosts poured from the buildings, circling above me like a screaming tornado. At the center floated Evelyn. She wore an old black dress, a silver key at her waist, and the expression of someone who had been waiting 80 years to complain to management. Her eyes burned green. Behind her, headless servants carried trays covered in dust, and spectral musicians played instruments with no strings. Evelyn told me every owner of Gloamridge had either died, fled, or become part of the wallpaper. I looked at the nearest house. A human face was trapped in the wallpaper, snoring. Then she gave me one chance to leave. Instead, I asked whether she had any experience running a hotel. The ghosts went silent. Evelyn's face became even colder, which was impressive considering she was dead. She raised one hand, and the mansion on the cliff woke up. Its front doors opened like jaws, windows blinked. Stone legs tore out of the hill, and the entire mansion began crawling toward the square. Every step shattered the road. Gargoyles leaped from the roof. One of them was Gideon, a wide stone creature with curled horns, tiny wings, and the permanent scowl of a man who had been interrupted during lunch. He landed in front of me, and tried to bite my head off. I touched his forehead. Damaged guardian statue detected. Gideon froze. Possible renovations, fountain ornament, fireplace, security chief. I selected security chief. Gold lines spread through his body, his cracked wings snapped into perfect shape, his stone claws became polished obsidian. A neat black vest appeared around his thick torso, complete with a little gold badge. The curse inside him twisted, compressed, and became a protective aura that covered the entire square. Gideon looked down at his vest, then he looked at me. Then he asked for a raise. I told him he had been employed for 4 seconds. He said that was long enough to understand my management style. Before we could argue, the walking mansion reached us and lowered its entrance like it was about to swallow the village. Evelyn commanded the doors to close around me. I ran straight inside. The foyer stretched into endless darkness. The floor became a tongue. Hundreds of hands pushed out from the walls. Portraits turned their heads and screamed. A chandelier dropped from the ceiling, but I slapped it in mid-air. Cursed lighting fixture detected. I chose luxury illumination. The chandelier burst into a miniature galaxy. Crystal stars spun beneath the ceiling, and every ghostly flame changed into warm golden light. The endless darkness vanished. Marble pillars repaired themselves. The floor tongue flattened, polished, and became a moving walkway that carried me deeper into the mansion. The hands in the walls tried to grab my ankles. I renovated the walls into a coat check room. Every hand suddenly wore a white glove, and began politely taking hats from confused ghosts. The portraits screamed louder. I renovated them into live entertainment. Now they sang harmony. The mansion fought me room by room. A staircase grew teeth, so I turned it into a velvet escalator. A hallway folded into a loop, so I assigned it the function of indoor jogging track. A dining room tried to digest me, so I upgraded it into an all-you-can-eat buffet, where the plates chased the food instead of the guests. A bed launched itself through 3 walls, and I converted the whole bedroom into a luxury catapult suite with padded landing zones. Every repair drained energy, but every successful renovation returned more than it cost. The curses were not obstacles, they were fuel. The stronger the curse, the more absurd the new function could become. By the time I reached the mansion's heart, I was glowing. Evelyn waited in the grand ballroom beside a black crystal the size of a carriage. Chains of mist ran from the crystal into every ghost. The mansion had not become haunted by accident. The crystal was a grief core, a cursed engine built from decades of fear. It trapped every soul in Gloamridge and forced them to attack anyone who entered. Evelyn was not the master of the mansion, she was its longest-serving prisoner. The grief core fired a beam of darkness wide enough to erase the ballroom. I put both hands on the floor. Full structural renovation. The entire mansion screamed. The beam hit me, but the floor rose into a curved wall of crystal, caught the darkness, and split it into 1,000 glowing ribbons. Pillars spun like gears. The ceiling opened to the storm. Lightning poured down into the grief core. Every chain became visible. I could have destroyed the crystal, but that would have scattered the trapped ghosts forever, so I did something much more useful. I renovated it into a power generator. The black crystal unfolded into a giant golden furnace, surrounded by glass tubes. Grief became heat, screams became music, lingering curses became clean spiritual energy that flowed through the mansion like bright blue blood. The chains around the ghost transformed into silver name tags. The dead servants stared at them. Evelyn's tag read, General Manager. Gideon's read, Security and Maintenance. Mine read, Owner, Visionary, and currently soaking wet. The mansion settled back onto the cliff. Its broken towers repaired themselves. New balconies unfolded from the walls. The roof became a garden of glowing flowers. A giant sign appeared over the entrance. The Grand Gloam Hotel. Evelyn looked around at the shining lobby, the floating luggage carts, the singing portraits, and the headless bell attendants now wearing perfect uniforms. For the first time she smiled. Then every light in the hotel went red. A warning appeared in front of me. Primary curse stabilized. Secondary curse awakening beneath the bath district. The cliff shook. A pillar of boiling black water shot into the sky from the far end of the village. Something enormous roared under the earth. I had owned Gloamridge for less than 1 hour. My hotel was already under attack by a hot spring. Perfect. The bath district had once been Gloamridge's pride. Now it looked like the earth had tried to cook the village and forgotten the recipe. Stone pools bubbled with black foam. Wooden bathhouses leaned over glowing cracks. Steam formed hands that slapped anyone who came close. At the center, a spring erupted every few seconds and launched burning water higher than the mansion. Gideon landed beside me, opened an umbrella, and watched the chaos with deep disappointment. Evelyn floated through the rain without getting wet. She explained that the spring had been cursed by a buried serpent. Anyone who entered the water became younger for 5 minutes, older for 10 years, invisible on Tuesdays, and extremely angry at soup. That was not a hot spring, that was a marketing opportunity with poor safety controls. I touched the cracked stone at the edge of the largest pool. The system showed me hundreds of faults at once, poisoned minerals, broken channels, angry spirits, a serpent wrapped around the underground heat source. The whole district was so damaged that repairing it piece by piece would take weeks, so I selected district renovation. The ground turned transparent beneath my feet. I saw the underground tunnels as lines of light. I saw the spring water moving through the mountain. I saw the serpent, a gigantic skeletal creature with 6 jaws, thrashing around a ball of blue fire. Then I grabbed the entire bath district with my power and rotated it. Buildings lifted from the ground, pools slid across the street like game pieces, pipes ripped out of the earth, braided themselves together, and formed a shining metal dragon around the district. The black water rose into the sky in a twisting column. The serpent followed it. 6 skulls burst through the clouds, each one screaming steam. Its body was longer than the village. It lunged at me with enough force to crush the cliff. I did not attack it. I renovated its skeleton into plumbing. Silver bands snapped around every bone. Its ribs became water tanks. Its spine became a heated tunnel. Each skull changed into the entrance of a different water slide. The serpent slammed into the ground, curled around the district, and locked into place as the world's largest bathhouse. The curse inside the water had nowhere to go. I filtered it through the grief generator, separated its effects, and assigned each one to a different pool. One pool healed wounds, one restored energy, one made tired muscles feel weightless, one gave guests glowing skin, one turned people invisible, but only from the neck down, so I marked it as an adults-only comedy bath and placed towels nearby. The soup anger effect became a seasoning fountain in the restaurant. I had no idea why it made stew taste incredible. I was not going to question success. When the steam cleared, the district had become the Phantom Springs Spa. Waterfalls poured from the serpents' mouths. Floating lanterns drifted over crystal pools, ghost attendants carried warm towels, the old bathhouses had transformed into towers connected by steaming bridges, a final pool sat beneath the serpent's largest skull, its water shone gold, rare function unlocked, curse refinement. Anything soaked in that pool could have a harmful curse weakened and converted into a useful effect. Evelyn stared at the pool, her transparent fingers trembled. I understood immediately. She stepped into the water. For 1 second, the spring went black, then light burst across the district. The chain still hidden inside her spirit cracked apart. She did not return to life, but her ghostly body became solid enough to hold a cup, open a door, and most importantly, slap Gideon when he complained that the towels were folded incorrectly. He called it a miracle. She slapped him again. By sunrise I had a hotel, a spa, and several hundred ghost employees who had not taken a day off in 80 years. What I did not have were guests. Most people considered that a problem. I considered it a challenge. I repaired the old bell tower in the village square and converted its cracked bell into a broadcasting beacon. Instead of making sound, it projected images through every puddle within 50 miles. Farmers, merchants, adventurers, and travelers looked down that morning and saw a perfectly edited vision of the Grand Gloam Hotel. They saw a skeletal waterslide, a floating buffet, a storm-lit ballroom, and a message promising free lodging to the first 100 guests who survived check-in. Evelyn told me the word survived might discourage families. I changed it to completed. By afternoon, a single wagon arrived. It contained 12 thrill seekers, 3 exhausted merchants, a newly married couple who had taken the wrong road, and 1 critic from a famous travel journal. None of them trusted me. The critic stepped through the gate wearing white gloves and the expression of a man prepared to hate everything. Then the road bowed and carried their wagon to the hotel by itself. The ghosts unloaded every bag in 6 seconds. The singing portraits welcomed the guests by guessing their favorite songs. Gideon scanned everyone for hidden weapons, cursed objects, and outside food. He confiscated a sandwich, ate it, and called the inspection complete. For 10 minutes, everything went perfectly. Then the hotel tried to kill the critic. A section of the original curse had survived inside his room. The wardrobe opened into a bottomless pit. The carpet became a nest of shadow snakes. The bed grew claws and dragged him toward the ceiling. I arrived before he could scream a second time. Instead of destroying the curse, I saw what it wanted. It fed on panic. The more afraid its victim became, the stronger the room grew. So I gave it a better job. I renovated the room into an interactive horror suite. The shadow snakes became soft ropes that pulled guests through hidden doors. The bottomless wardrobe gained a safe route through a pocket-sized dungeon. The bed claws became a mechanical ride that swung across the ceiling while ghost pirates fired pillows from cannons. The critic went from screaming in terror to screaming with joy. He completed the dungeon in 12 minutes, found a treasure chest full of warm cookies, and immediately asked to go again on a harder setting. That night, the guests filled the ballroom. The newly married couple danced under the stars in the chandelier. The merchants soaked in the energy pool and decided to extend their stay. The thrill seekers competed to see who could survive the cursed water slide backward. The critic wrote one sentence in his journal: Gloam Ridge is either the future of travel or a beautifully managed disaster. I had never received a better review. By the next morning, wagons lined the road. By noon, every room was occupied. By sunset, we had our first major emergency. The clouds descended, not rain, not fog. The entire storm came down like a living ocean. Black clouds swallowed the rooftops. Lightning walked through the streets on long white legs. Wind ripped balconies from the hotel and spun them around the village. At the center of the storm floated Celeste. She was not a ghost. She was an ancient weather spirit, wearing a coat made of thunderheads, with silver hair whipping around her face and eyes brighter than lightning. She had been trapped inside the ruined observatory above Gloam Ridge long before the village was built. The Grief Corps' destruction had weakened the prison around her. She did not thank me for the rescue. She dropped a tornado on my hotel. I raised one hand and renovated the tornado into an elevator. The spinning column became a clear glass tube. Guests inside floated gently upward, while lightning flashed around them. The tornado elevator connected the spa, hotel, and cliff garden in seconds. Celeste hurled 12 bolts at me. I converted them into glowing rails. Then she created hailstones the size of houses. I renovated the village roofs into giant pinball paddles. The hailstones bounced across the sky, struck the lightning rails, and raced around Gloam Ridge like blazing silver comets. Guests poured onto the balconies to watch. Some began placing bets. Celeste screamed that the storm was not entertainment. I agreed. It needed better seating. I touched the observatory hill and activated full renovation. The hill split open. The ruined observatory rose from the mud, spinning as broken stone rings separated from its tower. Cracked lenses flew into the air and fused into a giant crystal dome. Copper pipes wrapped around the hill. Lightning rods unfolded like silver trees. The prison chains around Celeste became visible, stretching from her body into 7 storm clouds above the village. I could have broken the chains. Instead, I renovated the prison into a control room. The observatory transformed into the Sky Pavilion, a floating weather station surrounded by rotating balconies. Each chain became a lever, controlling one part of the storm: rain, wind, thunder, fog, snow, sunlight. Dramatic timing. Celeste crashed onto the central platform. For the first time in centuries, the storm was no longer crushing her. It was listening to her. She pulled the sunlight lever. The clouds opened. A single beam fell over Glomridge, struck the hotel's tallest tower, and spread across every wet roof in a wave of gold. People in the streets stopped moving, ghosts leaned out of windows, even Gideon removed his little cap. The village had not seen the sun in 80 years. Celeste could have left then, but she looked down at the guests cheering beneath the storm rides, the lightning rails and the hailstone pinball course. Then she looked at the control panel. She pulled the snow lever. Soft snow began falling over the hot springs while the rest of the village remained warm. She pulled the thunder lever twice and discovered it could play drums. By evening, Celeste had appointed herself director of weather experiences. She did not ask my permission. She also created a tiny rain cloud that followed Gideon everywhere because he had called her coat drafty. Our resort now had custom sunsets, indoor blizzards, lightning races, and a cloud lounge where guests could sit on the sky. That should have been enough to make Glomridge famous. Instead, it made us a target. Quentin arrived 3 days later in a carriage made entirely of polished glass. He owned the largest chain of luxury resorts in the kingdom. His properties had white beaches, perfect gardens, and staff members who never floated through walls. He had spent years convincing wealthy travelers that danger was something poor people experienced. Henabili Trabutsenim poor people experienced. He stepped into my lobby, watched a headless attendant carry 6 suitcases at once, and smiled like a man inspecting a stain. Quentin had the rare power to create solid illusions. He could build fake rooms, fake food, fake sunlight, and even fake people that lasted for hours. It was perfect for making resorts look grand in paintings. It was also perfect for making competitors look terrible. He toured Glomridge without touching anything. He called the ghost staff unsettling. He called the spa irresponsible. He called the tornado elevator a death trap. Then the elevator carried him safely to the roof while serving tea. He still gave it 1 star. Quentin offered to buy the village for a laughable amount. When I refused, he warned me that novelty faded. People might visit a cursed hotel once, but they would return to places that were safe, simple, and controlled. Behind him, a guest shot out of the skeletal waterslide, landed in a floating pool, and shouted that it was the greatest moment of his life. I asked Quentin whether he wanted a towel. He left without answering. The next morning, every road into Glomridge vanished. Travelers followed the signs and arrived at a fake village built from Quentin's illusions. It looked like Glomridge, but the hotel rooms were filthy, the ghosts were violent, and the hot springs smelled like boiled boots. Disgusted visitors turned around before reaching the real gate. Evelyn discovered the trick when a ghost messenger flew through the illusion and reported an entire copy of our village sitting 2 miles away. Gideon wanted to smash it. Celeste wanted to drop a month of rain on it. I had a better idea. Quentin's illusions were solid, which meant my power recognized them as structures. I walked into the fake village and placed my palm on the fake gate. Temporary property detected. The system warned that renovations would only last as long as the original illusion. That was more than enough. I renovated Quentin's fake Glomridge into an advertisement for the real one. The dirty hotel stretched into a giant arrow pointing down the correct road. The violent ghost illusions became a marching band. The fake hot springs erupted into letters across the sky that read, "You are almost there." Every fake building folded flat, stacked itself into a moving walkway, and carried the confused visitors directly to my front gate. Quentin cancelled the illusion. The walkway vanished, and 200 guests dropped the last inch onto the real road. We gave them free cake. His sabotage doubled our attendance, so Quentin tried something stronger. That night, his people planted a sun crystal in the graveyard. The crystal released pure daylight through the soil. It did not hurt living people, but it burned ghosts and forced every curse in the area to rise to the surface. At midnight, the graveyard exploded. Thousands of pale shapes shot from the ground. Tombstones spun into the air. Bone trees tore out their roots. A giant made from mausoleums, coffins, and green fire stood up behind the hotel. The grave colossus was tall enough to hold the mansion in one hand. Guests panicked. Ghost employees flickered. Evelyn collapsed in the lobby as false sunlight flooded the village. Quentin stood on a distant hill, watching through an illusion. He expected me to defend the hotel. Instead, I ran toward the colossus. Its fist came down. I renovated the street into a springboard. The stone launched me over the fist, past its shoulder, and onto the giant's chest. Coffins opened around me. Skeletal arms grabbed for my legs. I repaired each coffin as I passed, but not into boxes. I turned them into speakers. The colossus roared, and its own roar blasted from hundreds of speakers across its body. The sound shook the clouds. Celeste caught the vibration, fed it into the thunder controls, and sent a drumbeat across the whole village. I reached the sun crystal buried in the giant's heart. Destroying it would stop the attack, but Quentin could always make another, so I renovated the graveyard around it. The ground opened into a circular stadium. Tombstones became cushioned seats. Bone trees twisted into glowing arches. The colossus sank waist deep into the center as chains of blue fire wrapped around its limbs. Then its mausoleum chest unfolded into a stage. The grave colossus became the main performer in Glomridge's new midnight concert arena. Its coffin speakers played thunder music. Ghost musicians flew around its head. Celeste fired controlled lightning between its raised hands. Evelyn recovered the moment I redirected the sun crystal into spotlights that strengthened spirits instead of burning them. The guests stopped running. They turned around. Within minutes, the attack had become a concert. The colossus tried to resist, so I gave it rhythm controls. Every time it stomped, the stadium floor flashed. Every time it swung an arm, fireworks burst from its fingers. The curse feeding it changed from rage to excitement, and the more the crowd cheered, the more stable it became. Quentin's illusion on the hill flickered. I waved at him from the giant's shoulder. He vanished. By morning, images of the concert had spread across every puddle connected to our broadcasting bell. Reservations flooded in. Merchants began selling little stone figures of Gideon wearing his security vest. Gideon bought 3, and claimed they were for evidence. Gloamridge was no longer a strange hotel beside a cursed spa, it was becoming a city of attractions. That growth created a new problem. There were too many guests, and no safe way to bring them through the mountains. The old road twisted every night, wagons jammed at the gate, and flying creatures kept stealing luggage. Then, at exactly midnight, a train screamed beneath the village. There were no tracks in Gloamridge. There had never been tracks in Gloamridge. But a black locomotive burst through the graveyard wall anyway, dragging 50 burning carriages behind it. Ghostly passengers pressed their faces against the windows. Iron chains whipped from the engine. The train crossed the concert stage, climbed into the air, and aimed straight at the hotel. Evelyn recognized it. The Midnight Express had vanished with all its passengers 60 years earlier. It had finally reached its destination. Unfortunately, its destination was my lobby. I had 6 seconds before the locomotive hit. I touched the hotel steps. The entire entrance rotated upward. Marble stairs stretched into the sky, split into rails, and caught the train 10 feet from the lobby doors. Sparks exploded across the square. The locomotive raced vertically up the hotel wall, circled the highest tower, and shot back into the clouds. Guests screamed from the balconies. The ghost passengers screamed from the train. Gideon screamed because the engine had knocked over one of his collectible statues. I jumped onto the final carriage as it passed. The Midnight Express was not simply haunted. It was trapped inside its last journey. Every carriage repeated a different moment from the night it vanished. In one, passengers ate the same meal again and again. In another, rain struck the windows, even though the train was flying above the clouds. In the next, a shadow moved beneath every seat, and whispered that the bridge ahead was broken. Mat da beneath I ran toward the engine while the train circled Gloamridge faster and faster. The doors between carriages refused to open, so I renovated them into short-range portals. I stepped through one, and came out 4 cars ahead. The dining carriage threw knives at me, so I turned the tables into spinning shield platforms. A wall of cursed luggage blocked the aisle, so I assigned every suitcase the function of personal transportation. They sprouted tiny wheels, formed a line, and carried me forward like a parade of angry turtles. At the engine, I found the real curse. The conductor had died trying to stop the train before it reached a collapsed bridge. His fear had fused with the locomotive, forcing it to run forever because stopping meant accepting that everyone was already gone. I placed my hand on the control panel. The engine showed one destination, home. I could not give the dead their old homes back. Most of those homes no longer existed, but I owned a hotel with excellent vacancies in the spirit wing. I renovated the train's destination. The track in the sky flashed gold. The engine stopped fighting. Its flames changed from red to blue. The broken bridge from 60 years ago appeared ahead as a ghostly gap between 2 mountains. Then my new rails shot across it. The Midnight Express crossed the place where it had once fallen and entered Gloamridge safely for the first time. Every trapped passenger became clear. They looked out at the glowing hotel, the hot springs, and the ghost staff waiting on the platform. The loop ended. Some spirits faded peacefully. Others stepped off and asked whether we were hiring. Evelyn hired them before I could answer. The locomotive received a full renovation. Its rust became black crystal. Burning carriages turned into luxury cabins. The shadow beneath the seats became a snack service that grabbed crumbs before they hit the floor. The screaming whistle remained unchanged because Celeste said it improved the atmosphere. The Midnight Express became our mountain shuttle. It could ride old memories instead of physical tracks, which meant it could reach any town where someone remembered a road to Gloamridge. Our transportation problem was solved overnight. 3 days later, the train brought 10,000 guests. That was when the abandoned castle woke up. It stood beyond the village on a ridge shaped like a claw. Until then, even the ghosts avoided it. The hotel was haunted by grief. The hot springs were haunted by rage. The castle was haunted by boredom. That sounded harmless. It was not. The castle had spent centuries creating games for itself. It rearranged its rooms, trapped intruders, and forced them to play until they lost. The growing noise from Gloamridge finally caught its attention. At noon, its drawbridge stretched across the valley like a tongue and scooped up an entire train full of guests. I grabbed Evelyn, Gideon, and a floating luggage cart, then rode the cart down the drawbridge at full speed. Celeste followed above us inside a thundercloud, mostly because the castle had stolen several guests from her weather workshop. Inside, the entrance hall split into 100 doors. A giant clock appeared on the ceiling and began counting down from 10 minutes. The castle's voice announced that we had to find the guests before time ran out. Every wrong door would make the maze larger. Gideon chose a door at random. It opened into a room full of giant cats dressed as judges. We backed out slowly. I touched the floor and asked the system for a structural map. Nothing appeared. The castle changed too fast to map. Every room moved the moment we looked away, so I stopped trying to follow the maze. I renovated the concept of navigation. Gold lines spread from my fingers, not through the stone, but through every choice the castle offered. Wrong doors turned red, dangerous doors hissed, useful doors began playing cheerful music. One tiny door on the ceiling flashed green. Gideon flew up, opened it, and was hit by a river. The water swept all of us into a banquet hall where tables ran on spider legs. We rode the tables through a kitchen throwing flaming pies, across a library where books tried to rewrite our memories, and into a ballroom filled with invisible dancers. Every room was ridiculous. So I made them better. The flaming pies gained frosting shields and became ammunition for a food battle arena. The memory books became choose-your-own-adventure attractions. The invisible dancers received glowing shoes. The giant judge cats got a courtroom comedy show, where guests were accused of crimes like wearing boring socks. The castle grew angry, walls slammed shut around us, towers twisted together, the floor dropped away, revealing a huge game board floating over darkness. The kidnapped guests stood as pieces on one side, on the other waited monsters carved from furniture, carpets, clocks and doors. The castle challenged me to win. I moved one guest forward, a wardrobe beast charged. I renovated the square beneath it into a trapdoor, and dropped it into the spa's invisible pool through a portal. The castle changed the rules, now the board tilted. I renovated the pieces into hovercrafts. It changed the rules again, now every move created 2 enemies. I converted defeated enemies into friendly game assistants. Soon my side had an army of flying sofas, shield-shaped carpets, and clocks that yelled strategic advice 3 seconds too late. The castle became desperate. It fused every remaining monster into a towering creature made from staircases and locked doors. The thing had a clock face for a head, and a keyhole in its chest. It swung a spiral staircase like a whip, smashing half the board. I ran up the staircase while it was still moving. Each step broke beneath me, but I repaired them into launch pads. One threw me to its shoulder, another launched me past its head. Celeste struck my boots with lightning, and I flew straight into the keyhole. Inside the creature was the castle's core, a tiny empty room, containing a single dusty toy. That was the source of everything. Long ago, the castle had been built for a child who never arrived. The magic inside it kept preparing games for a guest who did not exist. Centuries of waiting had twisted playfulness into cruelty. I picked up the toy and repaired it. The tiny wooden figure became a glowing mascot with a ridiculous cape. It waved at me, kicked open the core room, and started rearranging the castle from within. I selected full property repurpose. The ridge erupted in light. Towers bent into roller coaster loops. The drawbridge became a racing track. Moats turned into glowing obstacle courses. The game board rose through the roof and unfolded above the valley as a floating arena. Every dangerous room gained difficulty settings, safety exits and snack stations. The castle was no longer bored, it was busy. The kidnapped guests were released directly into the grand opening of Gloamridge Adventure Fortress. Half of them forgot they had been kidnapped and complained only that the ride ended too soon. Our resort now had enough attractions to keep a person entertained for a month. Quentin looked at that success and finally stopped smiling. He did not try another small trick. He decided to erase Gloamridge completely. Quentin's final weapon appeared at dawn. A second sun rose over the mountains. It was a perfect white sphere held inside rings of glass. Solid illusions formed a palace beneath it, stretching from one peak to the next. Waterfalls ran upward. Golden gardens floated in the air. Thousands of fake guests filled shining balconies and cheered for a resort that had not existed the night before. Then the white sun opened its eye. A wave of false daylight slammed into Gloamridge. Ghosts vanished from sight. The hotel's blue flames went dark. The hot springs stopped glowing. The Midnight Express fell out of the sky and crashed through the concert arena. Celeste pulled every weather lever at once, but the artificial sun burned through her clouds. Quentin's voice rolled across the valley. He promised every traveler a perfect vacation with no curses, no danger, and no Adrian. His illusion spread over my village. Guests looked around and saw the Grand Gloam Hotel rotting again. They saw monsters in the spa. They saw the castle collapsing. The images were fake, but panic was real. People rushed for the gate. That was Quentin's true attack. He was not trying to destroy my buildings, he was trying to destroy trust. For one dangerous moment, it worked. The grief generator in the hotel began feeding on fear faster than it could process it. The grave colossus tore free from the concert stage. The bath serpent's 6 skulls screamed. The adventure fortress switched every game to maximum difficulty. Without the ghost staff, thousands of guests were trapped inside attractions that were becoming cursed again. I ran to the square and activated village renovation. The system refused. Foundation instability detected. The artificial sunlight was forcing every curse downward, compressing centuries of dark energy beneath Gloamridge. Streets split. Black light poured from the cracks. Houses tilted toward a hole opening under the village. Then something below us inhaled. The entire lake disappeared into the ground. A hand larger than the hotel burst through the cliff. It was made of mud, ruins, roots, bones, and pieces of buildings older than Gloamridge. Another hand followed. A head rose beneath the square, covered in windows that opened like eyes. The buried curse lifted the whole village on its back as it climbed out of the mountain. This was not a monster living beneath Gloamridge. It was the remains of every settlement the valley had swallowed before ours. Quentin had driven all the curses into one body. The ancient thing stood up, carrying streets and buildings across its shoulders. The hotel slid toward the edge. The spa cracked in half. Guests fell from balconies as the valley tilted. I renovated the rain into nets, Celeste caught the falling guests in sheets of water, Gideon grew his wings to 10 times their normal size by stealing decorative stone from the gate, then carried entire wagons to safety. Evelyn forced herself visible through pure anger and led the ghost staff back into the hotel. I climbed onto the ancient giant's forehead, Quentin moved his false sun directly above me, white fire poured down, my coat burned, my hands shook. The system could not classify the creature as a building because it was moving, and it could not classify it as a beast because half its body was architecture. That was when I noticed something Quentin had overlooked, his shining palace was still an illusion. And my system considered solid illusions temporary structures. I touched the beam of false sunlight around my hand. Renovate temporary structure. Quentin's entire palace froze. He tried to dismiss it, but I was no longer using the illusion as a building, I was using it as scaffolding. The golden towers stretched downward from the mountains, fake bridges wrapped around the buried giant's arms, glass rings from the artificial sun dropped over its shoulders, illusionary gardens flattened into enormous plates around its body. Quentin cancelled everything. For one instant, the scaffolding vanished, but in that instant, my system had mapped the shape. I slammed both hands onto the giant. Total territory renovation. Every attraction in Gloamridge answered. The grief generator launched a river of blue energy through the streets. The bath serpent wrapped around the giant's spine and became a geothermal circulation system. Celeste turned the false sun's heat into a cyclone and drove it through the sky pavilion. The grave colossus planted both hands in the ground and beat a rhythm that synchronized every building. The Midnight Express roared out of the broken arena. It raced around the giant on tracks made from memory, stitching damaged sections together each time it passed. The Adventure Fortress fired glowing game pieces into the sky, and they locked onto the giant like armor-shaped balconies. Not battle armor, vacation armor. Swimming pools unfolded across its shoulders, hotel towers rose from its back, waterfalls poured down its arms, the ancient windows covering its face became observation decks, its fingers transformed into 5 different thrill rides. A massive dining hall opened inside its chest, complete with a view of the glowing curse engine that now powered its body. The giant stopped roaring. They'd looked down at its hands, then the system assigned it a new function, Mobile Resort Foundation. Gloamridge stood upright. The whole village was now carried by a mountain-sized guardian that could walk. The guests went silent. I pointed toward Quentin's artificial sun. The guardian punched it. The white sphere shattered across the sky. Celeste caught every piece of false daylight, mixed it with real storm clouds, and renovated the explosion into the largest aurora the kingdom had ever seen. Gold, blue and purple light flowed from horizon to horizon. The ghost staff became visible again. The hotel ignited. The spa erupted in 6 shining waterfalls. The guests did not run for the gate, they ran for the balconies. Quentin's palace vanished. His glass rings broke. He fell from the mountain inside a bubble of his own illusion, and bounced down the road until Gideon stopped him with 1 foot. I expected Quentin to threaten me. Instead, he looked up at Gloamridge walking across the valley with a castle on its shoulder and a train circling its head. Then he asked how I had done it. I told him the truth. I saw value where he saw damage. That was the difference between us. Quentin had spent his life creating perfect things that disappeared the moment his focus broke. I took broken things and gave them a reason to remain. He left before sunset. His luxury resorts did not close, they simply became quiet. Travelers who once wanted safe rooms and painted gardens now wanted ghost concerts, thunder skating, monster-shaped spas, and breakfast served by luggage with wheels. Gloamridge became the most popular resort in the kingdom before the end of the month. The Midnight Express ran day and night. The hotel expanded into 3 new towers. Celeste scheduled 7 types of weather before lunch. Evelyn created standards so strict that even invisible dust was afraid to enter the lobby. Gideon formed a security squad from gargoyles and spent most of his time stopping guests from climbing into the guardian's nose. My family finally arrived during the Grand Aurora Festival. They came in the same kind of polished carriage that had once carried me away. They stared at the endless line of guests, the walking mountain beneath the village, and the giant sign announcing that every room was reserved for the next 18 months. My father stepped into the lobby and tried to speak to me as though the banquet had never happened. I smiled and asked whether he had a reservation. He did not. Evelyn offered him a bench near the coat check wall. One of the hands took his hat. I ate the dessert he had brought while the rest of my relatives waited outside in the rain. Celeste made sure the cloud followed only them. That night, I stood on the highest balcony of the Grand Gloam Hotel. Below me, ghosts and living guests danced together in the square. The grave colossus played drums, the bath serpent fired glowing water over the rooftops, the adventure fortress launched a roller coaster through the aurora, our ancient guardian walked 1 slow circle around the valley, giving everyone a view of the mountains. I had begun with a broken gate and a village everyone wanted to forget. Now the people who mocked me could not even get a room. That should have been the end. Then the Midnight Express returned from a route I had never given it. The engine rolled into the station without passengers. Frost covered every window. A black ticket rested on the conductor's seat beside a map that showed no part of our kingdom. Far beyond the mountains, drawn above an empty ocean, floated a city hanging upside down beneath the clouds. Towers pointed toward the water, streets curled around a dead moon. A single note had been burned into the map. Renovator requested. The system opened one quiet message. Remote cursed property detected. Evelyn looked at the map. Gideon packed 3 sandwiches. Celeste made the storm point east. I looked back at Gloamridge, bright, crowded and alive. My first great renovation was complete. The village no one wanted had become a destination no one could ignore, and somewhere beyond the horizon, an entire city was falling from the sky. I picked up the black ticket and smiled. It sounded like they needed a hotel.